Okay, and it looks like we've hit 11 o'clock here, so we're going to go ahead and start. I want to welcome you all to today's webinar. It's Deep Sea Fishing, Catching and Keeping Outstanding Chauffeurs, presented by LCT and the LMC Group. I'm Lexi Tucker, the Associate Editor here at LCT, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point in the chat box, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible after the initial presentation. Today's presenters are Alison Ford and Stephanie Carnes of the LMC Group. Alison started working as a recruiter in 2003 for an agency that specialized in healthcare jobs and has since continued working as a recruiter in many different areas such as hospitality, IT, livery, engineering, and more. She joined the LMC Group in 2015, recruiting for various livery-specific clients, where she assisted in countless hires for chauffeurs, reservationists, dispatchers, and management-level positions. She continues to work primarily in the business development department for the LMC Group and LMC Pays, selling their services across many industries, but is also the lead recruiter for the recruitment clients of the LMC Group. Stephanie has worked as a client solutions specialist for the LMC Group for 3 years. She is also a certified Myers-Briggs consultant and works with clients on everything from recruiting and training employees to RFP completion and public relations. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to them.
Thank you so much, Lexi. Thank you for hosting and organizing this webinar. I think it's definitely an area that is a hot topic for most of the operators out there. So we're going to get started with regarding, we know this is a hot subject because of the unemployment stats. So as you can see from looking at this, the unemployment, it looks like in the leisure and hospitality, it's slightly higher as far as unemployment this year than last, but it's certainly at an all-time low for many years. And that is where the challenge is for the operators in finding and keeping good drivers. And so that's what we're going to touch upon today on what we recommend our approach be. So the first thing is for sourcing. I mean, we recommend that you cast a wide net, which means that, you know, you try to be creative in all the areas that you are searching for drivers. Certainly, when you move forward, the websites that have the job board websites are really where everybody starts. And so the job boards that are most commonly used are Indeed, Craigslist, Monster, Career Builder, ZipRecruiter, Simply Hired. They're pretty cost effective. I can say that ZipRecruiter is one that kind of encompasses several different job boards at once. It's a little bit more expensive, but, you know, depending upon, you know, what you get for your return, it may be a good investment for you. I find personally for searching resumes, Career Builder is really the best site just for doing a straight search. But Indeed has been what I have found to yield the best results when you post a job and you get applicants back. And so you can start your search, getting your applicants, and then kind of going through the applicants to see who is most appropriate. Then as we drill down, there are driving schools. There are driving schools in most areas. There are candidates, people who are going to driving schools to get their CDL license. They make good candidates for chauffeur driver positions because, you know, right off the bat they want to drive for a living. They're going for their CDL license. They may want part-time hours while they go to school and learn their trade. And a lot of times we have seen these types of candidates go from a chauffeur position into a CDL position. You know, that transition's pretty simple when they go through getting their CDL license, so that can be a good area. Next, of course, is social media. If your company has set up for to post jobs on your company page, you can certainly post there. You can post in job posting job posting groups on social media, on Facebook, and also networking groups. I personally find the job board postings to social media yield pretty good results because they're depending upon what state or what city you're in. There are, for example, for New Hampshire, for the New Hampshire job board group on Facebook, they have over 23,000 members. So it's a good way to post a job and also network to get other candidates through the postings. So retirees, I find personally that retirees make excellent chauffeur drivers. They have been a professional person for many years. They know how to handle people. I have talked to operators who are sometimes reluctant to even consider retirees, thinking that they don't really want to work full time. Maybe they don't want to work at all. They're not sure why they're applying. I've had operators say, I got this applicant and the first job listed on their resume is that they had a job in 1974. Well, what am I going to do with that? And my answer to that is we've had many retirees end up being excellent drivers for chauffeur companies. They may not necessarily want to work full time. They may not necessarily want to work certain days or certain times of the year, but they do want to work. They are professional, and they will be usually reliable employees for you. So we definitely find that's a great tool to consider. Of course, job fairs, what adds value for job fairs is that you will interact with the prospective candidates face-to-face. You can get a copy of their resume. They usually have them with them, and you'll be able to speak with them. Sometimes we have done interviews right on the spot if they have the time to sit down and speak with us. Otherwise, we can get it set up on the spot. So that's always an added value for job fairs. So what I recommend to all of our clients, and we have this internally at the LMC Group, but it's certainly something to think about. Applicant tracking systems are specific for the recruitment world, and that is just, there's a lot of free ones, there's a lot of inexpensive applicant tracking systems, and the added value to that is that if you have people that apply to jobs on Indeed or Career Builder, you can usually parse the information from the resume of the candidates directly over to your applicant tracking system. You can then track the applicants. You can keep notes on the person. If you talk to somebody who's what you think is a really good candidate, but they're not necessarily looking for a job then, maybe they're looking for something in the future, or maybe maybe they just found another job and they're not looking at all. You may want to go back to that person in a year or two. You'll have all the notes and all the information on all your candidates prior to calling them, and you'll have a record of them. You can keep a spreadsheet or you can keep a list, but we recommend applicant tracking systems to track all your candidates down the road. And then that way you can come back to different candidates and you'll know, if somebody applies multiple times, you want to be able to look at the notes and say, oh, well, I talked to that person. They weren't very good. I'm not going to talk to them again. And you'll have all your notes in the applicant tracking system. And so the next bullet I'm going to tell you right now, it's two very dirty words in the chauffeur car industry, and I've talked to folks that they don't want to hear anything about it, and that is Uber and Lyft. I have talked to operators who absolutely want nothing to do with anyone who comes from a rideshare world, but I can tell you that it's been my experience in speaking with candidates, there are plenty of good candidates who come from this world, and there are plenty that aren't appropriate for chauffeur driving positions or chauffeur car service. Obviously, you're a high-end. You want somebody that's going to represent your company well, and you're going to want somebody who's professional. I have spoken with candidates who weren't appropriate and some that are. And the ones that are, I have found that they are not really on board with how things have been going with rideshare. There's been a lot of bad press. They don't like that either. They don't like to be associated with that. And there's also folks that have done it for quite a long time, and they like it, and they like driving, and they like customer service, but they have had an incredibly lot of money spent on wear and tear on their vehicle, and they want to get away from that, and they want to be able to be in a position where they work for a company that they're going to drive their cars. And we have found some great candidates in these rideshare companies. They're switching over. So the next area is screening. Our recommendation from the LMC Group is definitely to have a phone conversation first with prospective candidates. When you put your job posting out, say, for example, Indeed, you can get a lot of candidates. In some cases, there are, hundreds of candidates. And how do you go about making sure that you don't waste your time bringing all of them in? Anyone that you find appropriate in for a face-to-face interview, you want to be able to have a conversation on the phone first. Just really a couple of quick questions just to kind of get an idea of what kind of employee you think they will be. For me, I like to keep things light. I like to have really more of a conversation with a prospective candidate about themselves and their work history and talk to them about their experience. When it's more of a conversation, I mean, it could be a double-edged sword, so to speak. When you keep the conversation or the interview light, they may divulge more than they should, which is maybe a good thing for me, not so good for them. They'll give information about past jobs or situations, but they are more at ease and they'll give you more information during that conversation. When you look at their work history, I would say don't automatically discount an employee if they've jumped around a bit. There may be a reason. Maybe they are a contract employee. Maybe they moved. You want to talk to them about their history and the reasons why they maybe left a position and see what their history looks like. But you want to be mindful of, their staying power, so to speak, when it comes to being an employee for you. It's just been my experience that I have had, again, keeping the interview light and conversational. How do they speak about their past jobs and coworkers and managers? I have had situations where they will tell me everything that went wrong at every job they've had and why they hate their ex-manager or what happened, and that is obviously a red flag. But you want to see how they do speak about past jobs. Do they have a good experience? Do they have positive things to say about their last company or their manager or coworkers? That is certainly going to be an indicator of what kind of employee they will be going forward. And so we asked them about, difficult people and situations. Obviously, as drivers, there are going to be situations that arise that they're going to have to handle that could be stressful. My rule of thumb for any candidate, and you can ask questions for a candidate and they can give you sort of canned answers, so to speak. I always ask for specific examples of something that they did in their past job dealing with a difficult person or a situation. You want an example of that so you can really have it to see whether it's relatable to them as an employee for you, and make sure that they're specific and they tell you what the situation was and how they made it better or how they remedied that situation with the difficult person or situation. And again, obviously traffic issues are always going to be an issue for drivers. So you want to ask them something about, not necessarily specific, you can ask specific to traffic, but, if you leave it broad in that you say, how do you handle situations that have thrown your schedule off? And what do you do about that? And how do you plan ahead? So you get an idea of not only their response to situations that would throw their day off or their schedule off, but also how they are a planner and how they're going to be able to plan their day and plan for whatever comes up for them. And that's obviously important for a driver. You want somebody that goes above and beyond, obviously, as an employee. And again, this is something that I would ask for a specific example. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with their day-to-day, but maybe it has to do with a coworker or a manager or something that they did that makes them stand out. And if they can give you an example of that, that's always a positive thing. The question about helping a coworker in need, that's a question that I ask often of candidates, and sometimes they're thrown off by this a little bit and they don't really know where this comes from. I would always frame it in that they can give me an example of how they helped a coworker either on the job or even personally, and that would give you also an idea of not only what kind of employee they would be, but also what kind of a person they are, what kind of a human being that you're going to hire in this position, and that it's really a very telling question. So once you get past the phone screen, I think it's appropriate, again, to have that conversation with somebody, and you can determine in that conversation whether you think that they are appropriate to bring in for a face-to-face interview. And when you bring them in, it's a two-sided thing in that you want to be able to continue to make sure that they're an appropriate candidate for the position, and you also want to be able to make sure that you sell the company to them. You want to make sure that you present what it will be like as an employee for your company in a positive light, and you want to be able to reel them in and by giving them information about you and your company and your team. The biggest thing as far as interviewing somebody, I think, is setting the correct expectations for the job. There have been many instances where I have worked with a client where, sometimes the expectations are a little bit vague. For example, if you have, obviously, chauffeur companies are a 24/7 operation, and you want to bring in a driver or or reservations or a dispatcher, and you need some weekend coverage, but really you need somebody every single weekend. But you are afraid to say that because you think that it's not going to have as many candidates. And so we say, well, there are some weekend expectations. Well, if there's every weekend expectation, you want to maybe hire someone specifically for the weekend, and then hire other candidates, other employees that maybe could do some work during the week and then some weekends. So you make sure that you're covered. But you want to make sure that the expectations for the job and the schedule and the pay and the training are all laid out at the time of the interview so that they understand everything, because they won't necessarily always ask you. So it's going to be something that you're going to be able to talk about ahead of time, and then that way if they come on board, there are no surprises. So I always encourage folks to describe the team you have, and people sort of scratch their head and say, what do you mean by that? So I'll give you an example. So I work for the LMC Group. I mean, I think that we have the best team in the world. I say it all the time, ad nauseum sometimes. I'm always on Facebook and other places just saying how great we are and how positive we are. And I think that you need to have a time, put something aside in your mind when you're talking to a candidate. You're going to talk about your team, talk about your company, talk about why you make such a great team and how the cohesiveness of the team helps with all of the employees. How do you get along? What do you do for your people, for your employees, and what makes working for you a good experience? And I think if you have that information at the time of the interview, that's really going to go a long way when somebody decides that they want to come on board with you or with another company, because it's not always about money. It's about the relationships of employees together. And if you get along with your team and you have a positive team, that's always going to be a great selling point. Let them know about bonus opportunities. I mean, this is something that is always going to bode well for any new employee. We highly suggest that you offer referral bonuses, for example. If you have employees that are really good employees, chances are they're going to be able to refer somebody that is possibly going to be equally as good as them. And that is always an indicator when you see somebody as an employee, who they might recommend. They're not going to recommend somebody that they know they're not going to be a good employee. And I think it's just an incentive for them to give you recommendations of somebody to bring on for your organization. We go back to situationally based questions, and again, you want to make sure that you ask for examples of situations that they handled in their job, even if they don't have specific driving experience, if they come from a world that's professional or customer service driven, or even if they dealt with clients. You want situation-based questions to get examples of them on how they handled situations in their job that is going to be relatable to them as a driver for your company. Did they handle that situation or that person in a professional way? And if so, how did they do that? Give me an example of how you make things better or how you resolved a situation, and that's going to relate to them as being a representative of your company as a driver. Make sure you pay attention, of course, to how they present him or herself. We are in a world now that is maybe not as stringent as it was in the past in terms of how a person dresses for an interview. They may not be in a suit and tie, but if they're dressed, business casual, and they look neat, they present themselves well, and they speak in a professional way, that is really what's most important, and that is certainly something that you want to pay attention to. Excuse me, I'm having some technical difficulties. Hold on. Bear with me. My computer seems to have frozen. I apologize.
We were going to talk about compensation at this point. If you want to. Lexi, this is Stephanie. If you want, I can jump to retention and we can come back to compensation a little bit if you'd like.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said I can, this is Stephanie, and I can go on talking about retention now and come back to compensation later if we can.
Sure, if that's easier for you.
All right, everybody, this is Stephanie Carnes, and I'm going to talk to you about retention. So, you found that promising candidate and you're about to make an offer, but, the work isn't finished. You've invested a lot in that new hire, and the last thing you want now is for them to leave. And, turnover is expensive, and unfortunately, we all know it's fairly common. And on average, it costs 33% of an employee's annual salary to replace him or her. So if you have, say a full-time chauffeur who is base and gratuity, makes $40,000 per year, it can cost you over $13,000 to replace them. And the direct costs are, kind of obvious. There's overtime that you have to pay to your current employees to pick up the slack, and the recruiting costs to make the new hire, background checks and drug tests, training for the new employee that you have to hire. Not to mention that you may have to farm out trips when you don't have enough chauffeurs to cover them. But there are indirect costs as well. When you lose a good employee, then that employee's knowledge is lost, and that employee's relationships with clients are lost. And often it's your best employees who will suffer because of, again, having to pick up the slack, and that can hurt their morale. You also lose time that you now have to spend hiring somebody new and training that person. And many employees who leave shortly after they're hired, they report that the job wasn't what it was presented to them as, wasn't as advertised. So like Alison said, be honest about the requirements and the potential of the job. Don't tell fishtails. But with all this kind of depressing thought about turnover, the good news is that 75% of turnover is preventable. So we're going to talk about some big picture ways to retain employees and suggest some practical approaches that we have seen, work with our clients. The first step in retaining your new employees is a thorough onboarding process, and that starts even before they sign their new hire paperwork. And what we recommend to our clients is once you have completed the interview process and are ready to make an offer, then it's time to do reference checks. So before you've even made the offer, make sure you do the reference checks because you can find out a lot. So ask the candidate for 3 work references and make sure that you specify that you say a manager, a team leader, a supervisor, an owner, because people have a tendency to give you their close friend at work name as a reference, and you're just not going to get the same kind of information that way. So ask for the name and the email address and the phone number because it can be tricky to track down references. So ask each reference the same specific questions. And we find that if you're really confident in the candidate, if they have experience and just you're confident in them, and you've got 2 glowing references and you just can't get a hold of the third, it's probably going to be enough. So only after you have those references should you make the formal offer. But be very clear that the offer is contingent on two things: that a clean drug test and a clean background check. You can set the start date, but you just need to make it clear that the drug test and the background checks have to come back clear. So here's why onboarding matters. Your candidate has passed those checks and is now an employee. And if you're understaffed, it can be tempting to get them behind the wheel as soon as possible. That's why you hired them. But we are going to try to think long term, because the comprehensive onboarding process, it will pay off in the long run. Here's some reasons that onboarding matters. 69% of employees, so more than 2/3 of employees who stay at a company 3 years or more, report that they had a great onboarding process. And that's a real big indicator that they're going to stay. Another statistic is that 20% of turnover happens in the first 45 days, and maybe you've experienced that. You spend all the time in the recruiting and the testing and all the interviewing and the reference checks, and then the person's gone in the first couple of weeks. And that's very discouraging. So we really want to avoid that and pay attention to those early weeks. And we think of onboarding as a short-term sacrifice that leads to long-term productivity. There's evidence that employees that are thoroughly onboarded are 50% more productive than those who are not. So we want to make sure we have a good onboarding system. And the essentials of onboarding, there's 3 essential elements to your onboarding process. And the first one is operations, and it's the basics that we all think of when we think of onboarding. First day paperwork, make sure the chauffeur's tablet is set up and the chauffeur has access to your livery software and any other tech that they might need. It also includes familiarizing them with company policies, rules, regulations, procedures, any training programs that you provide, which we'll talk about in a minute. But just as important, part of your onboarding as operations is sharing your vision is also essential. It's a major part. You want your employees to be proud to be a part of your company. If you have a mission statement, and we highly recommend that you do, share it with them and explain how they fit into that mission. We live in a time when anyone with a smartphone can drive people around, and you can teach them what it means to be a chauffeur who provides professional, high-end, high-touch customer service. You can give them a high standard to work towards. And the last essential part of onboarding is the social aspect. It's easy to overlook, but over and over, studies show that people who have at least one friend at work are more likely to stay. So have a plan in place to introduce your new chauffeur to the office staff and the other chauffeurs. Some companies send out a company-wide email asking all employees to welcome the new chauffeur. Others will take new hires to lunch or call everyone together for coffee and introductions. Do something just to encourage warm and welcoming behavior from your current employees. The training, of course, is part of the onboarding process, and training and mentoring both can start in onboarding, but can continue as long as your employee is with you. People have different learning styles. Some people learn by hearing and seeing, and other people learn by doing. So you want to incorporate several different ways to train your employees to make sure that they're getting the full effect of the knowledge. We recommend that you provide some sort of formal classroom-style training for your chauffeurs, and that really can vary widely from company to company. If you have a chauffeur manager or a trainer and you have space for a meeting room, then that's great. You can have that person do the training in person. But if you're hiring just one chauffeur at a time, or you don't have somebody in that role, there are videos and online training that are available and are very effective. So that's good to use as well. So just make sure that you have an evaluation system, that you test what your new employees are learning. So that can be a written test, or it can be an oral test, or you can ask them to teach it back to you. Just make sure that it's sinking in. After you've done some sort of classroom training, then you can move on to the on-the-road training. And many companies will send a new chauffeur on trips with a seasoned chauffeur, first to observe and finally to drive, so that you can feel confident when you send that new chauffeur out to pick up your clients. And this kind of segues nicely into the idea of a mentor. And if you do have that chauffeur manager or a senior chauffeur who would be a good fit for this, that person can play the role of a mentor to your new hires. Or what you can do, what some other companies do, and you can match each new chauffeur with a more longer-term chauffeur in sort of a buddy system. That person is kind of their go-to to ask questions to introduce them around, integrate them into the company. And that can really help you as well as an owner or a manager, because that way you don't have to be the point person to answer every question that a new employee has. And remember that training shouldn't stop after the first week or two. Whatever job we have, we all can benefit from ongoing training and education. One thing that's really important is, regular safety meetings, just to brush up on awareness and new laws. Another thing that you can do is, if you do use those online training modules, you can have chauffeurs complete them in between runs so that they are keeping their skills fresh. Okay, so if you are a fan of the TV show The Office like I am, you probably know why Stanley looks so happy and excited in this picture. It was Pretzel Day. He was a grumpy, curmudgeonly character, and he didn't like his job, but he was happy on the one day a year that the whole office building got soft pretzels. It's really true. The small perks actually can mean a lot. Maybe you bring in bagels on Fridays, or donuts on Mondays, or pizza on the last day of the month. And part of the impact there is having that on a specific day, because people like traditions and they like to look forward to things. Even something that seems fairly small like that can make a big impact. And finally, we need to talk about good coffee. I want to ask you, do you really want to skimp on a substance that will enhance your chauffeur's good moods and alertness? I don't think so. So just make sure that you have good coffee and plenty of it. Spring for the good stuff. And if your budget allows, you don't have to stop at the small perks. You can show your appreciation in some bigger ways too. Think about having an annual family event. Your chauffeurs spend a lot of time with your clients and away from their families, and it's great to have their families be supportive of your company and feel a part of it too. So that could be a cookout, a picnic, even a Halloween party, but have everyone bring their family or their loved ones. Also, consider recognizing birthdays. Most adults don't get a lot of birthday recognition. That kind of ends at a certain point in your maybe teen years, but we all have birthdays, and it's fun for people to make a big deal of it. You could do a joint birthday celebration for everybody who has a birthday in August or September. Take them out to lunch, or have cake in the break room for them. One thing that we do at LMC is that our birthdays are a paid holiday, so you can imagine we really like that. It's fun to get your birthday off. Then if you do have employees, the longer you're in business and you do start having employees who stay 5, 10, 15, 20 years, consider offering gifts. Some sort of, it can, the sky's the limit there, of course, and it depends on a lot of factors, but we want to reward the behavior you're trying to see. So you want people to stay if they're good employees, and so reward them, when they do. Everyone loves an employee discount, so if that fits into your budget, then that can be something you can offer. One thing that we see people get excited about is if you do a holiday light tour in the wintertime, lots of chauffeurs and their families like to take advantage of that. And then company swag, which can certainly be a small perk as well. Anything from a pen to a coffee mug to clothing, it's a gift to your employees, and it's advertising as well. Okay, I'm going to talk about compensation, but first, Alison, are you back online?
I am back. Sorry about that, folks.
No problem. So do you want to talk about, in the kind of skipping back a little bit to the recruiting process, what are your thoughts on compensation, how that should be presented?
Absolutely. So I think there's just a certain psychology in presenting the compensation packages, particularly relating to drivers. Most companies have a base salary anywhere between, we've seen some with no base salary and they get only gratuities, but typically somewhere between maybe $7 to $12 per hour as a base, and then you get gratuities. So when I have presented this compensation package to candidates, somehow in their mind it just goes to the base salary. And they say, well, I don't want to work for $8 an hour. And I explain, well, you're not going to work for $8 an hour because you're going to get gratuities. And I give them the range of the gratuity. And I'm very honest about what the total compensation package is. And so I will sometimes ask them, if you were a waitress, do you think waitresses make a lot of money? And they say, well, yeah, of course they do. They make a lot of money. And I said, well, their base salary is $213 per hour. And then sometimes it resonates, sometimes it doesn't. And so we have, looked at getting creative with compensation packages for the drivers where you can give them a base, You can either give them the base salary with the gratuity, or you can give them a flat rate, which is an average of what you think they would make based on the work that you do and looking at that average for your drivers and the hours that they work, and present it in that way.
Okay, great. So that's going back to the recruiting phase. But once you have decided on your compensation, then the question is, can you ever afford to pay more? And it's obviously a big part of retaining employees. Employees often leave for better pay, but labor is a huge cost for businesses, so it's not always easy or even wise to give raises across the board. So if you're thinking about could you raise that hourly rate if you're sticking with hourly and gratuity, then you can project what your revenue is going to be this year and subtract your intended profit. And then, of course, whatever's left over is what you have to pay all the rest of your bills and pay all of your expenses. And once you take those out, if you have any left over, then you can make that decision if it's going to be wise to offer more compensation. And if you can't do it based on that, there's some other factors to consider, which could, take a lot more consideration. But have you raised your rates in a long time? If you haven't, I know it's scary, but sometimes it's the wise thing to do. So you can, think about that. And then as much as is possible, don't take on work at a loss. I know, of course, sometimes it has to happen and, keeping relationships and building relationships, but try to not make that a constant thing that you do. Also, consider the fact, just in terms of money, that paying too little can actually cost you more in the long run. We've already talked repeatedly about how much it costs to replace employees. So if you do have to rehire, then you may be paying those thousands of dollars that you could have been better spent putting them in your employee's pocket. And then, of course, there's some advantages to paying more. It increases morale, and of course, it's motivating. A lot of employees are motivated by a higher rate of pay, and of course, it also can increase productivity. There are actually studies that show that, like across the board, raises can increase productivity. Another essential part in retaining your employees is giving good and appropriate feedback. And of course, we want to start talking about positive feedback. Your employees need to know that you care about them, and they're not just there to make sure that your company runs, but you actually want them to have a good career and you're investing in them. So provide positive feedback whenever you can. Catch them doing something right and mention it. And when your company or your employees are complimented by your clients, be sure that everybody knows about it. You can print the emails and post them on a bulletin board or send a company-wide email. Everybody likes to know that they're working for a good company and likes the praise. And if you do give that positive feedback, then your employees will be more likely to listen when you give constructive feedback, when you need to point out something that they could improve or that they're doing incorrectly. They know that you care about them, then they'll see that constructive feedback as another part of that caring, that you just want them to do their best in their jobs, and so you'll tell them how they need to improve. Your feedback should be regular, and if formal feedback in terms of a review should be annual, but weekly and monthly check-ins are probably even more critical than that annual review, because your employees shouldn't have to wonder from year to year how they're doing. They should know what they're excelling in, what they need to work on, and what direction they're going in. So make sure that you don't skimp on the feedback. And of course, that we'll keep talking about the early days of a new hire. The 90-day introductory period is critical in forming that path that employee is going to take and whether or not they're going to stay. So make sure that you're getting positive and constructive feedback regularly during that time. And now the fun stuff we all like: recognition, rewards, celebrations. And these are the kinds of things that people remember and treasure. So holiday parties, of course, most companies will do something like that, but don't discount it. It really does bring people together. It's something they look forward to. Also, what about a summer cookout? The boss manning the grill, that's always fun. Of course, that could be incorporated with the family outing. And when something good happens in your company, celebrate it. If you land a big account or you purchase an exciting vehicle, your first bus or whatever it is, then celebrate that. Have everyone feel like they're part of that. It's a win for everybody. And you may want to institute like an old-fashioned Employee of the Month award, even if it's a name on a plaque or a parking space, just that recognition can feel really good. And as much as it's great to have recognition from the boss, we love to get recognition from our peers as well. It's great to know that somebody that you work with thinks you're doing a good job. And the way that we do this at the LMC Group is that we have a private Facebook page for our team. And when we want to praise someone on our team, we make a post and we call it the LMC Rockstar Award. And I can tell you, it is really fun. You click on Facebook and you see your name and somebody says something awesome that you did. It feels really good. And then you look for ways to praise other people too. So that's really encouraging. And you can encourage just that positive atmosphere by having your employees do that. And you can also use a bulletin board in the same way if you don't have a Facebook page. Another fun thing you can do that brings people together is have contests. Sales contests have obvious benefits for your business, but what about a wellness contest? Who can take the most steps in a month, or bring the healthiest lunch or something? Just those kinds of things tie people into the company. And speaking of that, the most important thing, more than anything, your company culture will have an effect on your ability to retain good employees. And so it's good to ask yourself, how healthy is your company culture? You want to be more than a paycheck to your employees. If you're just a paycheck, then as soon as they get a different, higher paying job, then they'll leave. But if you are more than that, then they will stay if they feel like you're integrated and part of your company. Make them proud to be part of your organization. And communicate with your employees clearly, frequently. Be available to them. You're busy. You can't be available at every moment of the day in every way, but train them. If you want them to contact you by text or by email or come to you in person, whatever works best for you, but just be available to them. A healthy company culture is mission-driven and has shared values. So that's why you start the onboarding with a mission statement, and that mission should influence the actions of all employees. Everything they do should go towards that mission. You should identify the values that you want your company to share, and whether that's mutual respect, positivity, hard work, and encourage those new employees. The workplace can definitely be competitive, but you should encourage teamwork. Everybody works together. Everybody rises and falls together. And an indicator, if you do have a healthy company culture, is high productivity. If your employees are productive, most likely you have a healthy company culture and they are engaged. You're going to want to make sure that you invest in people. We've already talked financially how you can do that, but invest in them with your time, your encouragement, your training, and that will encourage them as well. If you do see some problems start to crop up, nip those problems in the bud. Be sure to address them right away. It's not fun to do that, but it is the best way to handle it so things don't get out of hand. And then the last area here, that a healthy company, once you have a large enough company, you'll need someone to take on the role and the responsibilities of human resources. And by that, I just mean even the basics of new hire paperwork or any performance-related issues, maintaining employee files, annual reviews, team meetings, lots of things like that. So somebody at your company will need to oversee that for you, or you can outsource the HR tasks to a qualified consultant. But you want to invest, because like you invest in your vehicles to keep them clean and in great condition, good running condition, you want to invest in your employees too. Just be sure you have a plan for how you're going to manage them, because HR compliance and guidance really is essential. Okay. So just to recap, just to go over, Alison, you want to kind of recap the recruitment part of the?
Yeah. So, when you're selling anything, you want to make sure that, the sale is never done at the time of the actual sale. So if you're selling a job to a candidate, it's not over when you hire them. Obviously, it's an ongoing process. You want to make sure you get the right people. You want to make sure that you speak to your candidates positively about your company and make sure that you sell your company correctly and positively to them. And then once they come on board, Stephanie can speak on the retention piece.
Yes, you want to be the kind of company that people are excited to work for, that they are happy to be a part of your company. And just remember, it all comes down to company culture, and that starts at the top with you, and you can make a lot of changes to make it be the type of place that people are happy to work for and want to stay. All right. If we are ready for the question answer.
Excellent. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, go ahead and start typing them into the question box and I will ask them for you. Allison and Stephanie, I actually have a question for you guys.
Great.
So earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that you have to kind of consider selling yourself to a potential employee as well. It's not just them coming in to see what they can do for you, but rather what you can do for them, correct?
Correct.
So
Right.
my question would be, what's something that you can do at the time that they actually come in for the in-person interview that will help a company kind of stand apart?
I mean, I think it's really important for, presentation first and foremost. I mean, if you're a candidate, you want to make sure you look your best. Obviously, for the office, you want to make sure everything looks really nice and clean and neat. You want to maybe have a few people that can greet the candidate and say hello and show some friendliness towards them. I mean, again, maybe you want to give them a swag, maybe you give them a mug or something like that has the company name, but you also want to be able to speak about the culture of the company and have them see that when they walk in the door. They can kind of see what the culture is like, what the people are like, and if it's relaxed and positive. That's always a good experience for somebody coming in for an interview, certainly.
Excellent. And then you guys also mentioned the dreaded four-letter word, kind of potentially actually looking at Uber and Lyft drivers as they come in.
Yeah, 2 4-letter words, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Don't forget the so do you guys have any maybe examples of a company you've worked with where this has actually worked out?
Yeah, I actually have an example for a company out in California that we did quite a bit of recruiting for, and that seems to be maybe an area that Uber and Lyft could have sort of spread really, maybe I won't say first, but one of the biggest areas. It's really in the San Francisco area, and again, in the speaking with candidates initially for the phone screen, you want to be able to figure out if they are going to be appropriate for a car service. Not everybody is, but I've had quite a few candidates in that area that spoke to me specifically about how they don't really like, the reputation, so to speak, that car ride shares have had and all the issues that they've had, and how people that are going to use these services are very hesitant sometimes because of all this press, and they want to get out of it for that reason. But also, as I mentioned, just the wear and tear of their car. Although they do like the service of being a driver, they like customer service, and they're totally appropriate for being working for a chauffeur car company when they come from this area. And there's also a lot of ways to find them on Facebook. There's a lot of Uber and Lyft groups that you can kind of interact with folks. But I've talked personally with a lot of candidates in that particular area of the country, and I have found them to be great employees and candidates for chauffeur car service.
Yeah,
So
I can
definitely.
speak to that a little bit as well with just in some cities that are hard to get around, like Boston and things like that. If you have somebody that really knows their way around, that's obviously going to be an advantage too. So there's some of that too that can be a benefit for those drivers.
So I would say it's definitely kind of beneficial to, as much as the TNCs have hurt the industry, that it's important to realize that it's more so the TNC companies than it is the actual drivers that are exactly.
Right.
Excellent. All right. Do we have any more questions for these two lovely ladies? And as you can see, they have their emails up there in case you were a little shy about asking any questions that you have at the moment. So I think, you guys did a fantastic job covering everything. So I really want to thank you for all the time that you put into this presentation for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lexi, for organizing it.
Of course. And so, I mean, I want to thank everybody for their participation, for those who have who have been listening and taking into consideration what these two ladies had to say. At the end of the webinar, you'll also receive a short survey. So if you could please just take a few minutes to fill that out so we can continue to improve. And I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.